He screamed as the chemical splashed across his skin, his tiny hands clawing at the burning pain while the men in black just watched, expressionless, unbothered. His grandmother's cries pierced the suburban silence, but no neighbor came, no police arrived, and the so-called HOA enforcers vanished like ghosts. What they left behind wasn't just a wounded boy, it was the spark that would ignite a nationwide firestorm. It was the kind of Saturday that made you forget anything bad could ever happen. The kind of morning where sunlight slid lazily across the windows, and the air smelled faintly of fresh-cut grass and waffle syrup. In Willow Pines, Saturdays were sacred, slow-moving, suburban, predictable. That morning was no different. Birds chirped with confidence, the breeze tugged at the edges of the American flag out front, and for a moment, everything felt like it was exactly where it belonged. Inside the Thomas home, Gloria Thomas was already in the backyard, tending to her rows of hydrangeas and trimming the unruly vines that crept near the fence. At 71, she moved slower than she used to, but her eyes still had the sharpness of a woman who'd taught fifth-grade science for over 3 decades. Beside her, 11-year-old Elijah Thomas dragged a bucket of gardening tools across the patio. He wore mismatched socks, oversized cargo shorts, and a faded NASA t-shirt. His curls were wild, his cheeks smudged with dirt, and he smiled like the world was still simple. In that moment, it was. "That's good, sweetheart, set the trowels over there," Gloria said, wiping her brow with the back of a gloved hand. Elijah obeyed, humming under his breath, occasionally squirting water at the base of the tomato plants with a garden hose, pretending it was a laser blaster. Just inside the house, his father David was making breakfast, one ear tuned to the sizzle of bacon, the other catching pieces of an old Motown record spinning in the living room. He was 39, a freelance graphic designer who worked late nights and cherished mornings like this. He had no idea that their quiet life was about to be scorched into something unrecognizable. The sound came first, a low growl of an engine too deliberate, too controlled. David's hand froze mid-reach for the coffee pot. Out the kitchen window, he spotted it, a matte black SUV creeping into their driveway. No plates. Tinted windows. It didn't park, it prowled. The hairs on his arm stood up. "Gloria," he called out without even knowing why. But she didn't hear. In the backyard, Elijah paused mid-spray as the vehicle came to a stop. 2 men stepped out. Thick boots hit the concrete with heavy, assertive thuds. Both wore black tactical pants and tight-fitting shirts that read HOA enforcement in bold white lettering. One was bald with veins pulsing along his temple, tattoos crawling up the side of his neck. The other, heavier, with sunburned skin and a scowl that looked permanent. No clipboards. No golf cart. No neighborly smiles. Just 2 walking threats dressed like authority. Elijah blinked. Good morning," he offered, the hose still dangling from his hand. The bald man didn't answer. He scanned the backyard like he was casing a crime scene. "Chemical maintenance violation," the heavy one finally grunted, jerking his chin toward the pool. Gloria stepped forward, squinting at the men. "I beg your pardon?" "This unit's been flagged for illegal chemical use," the bald man replied, walking toward the pool. "We're here to neutralize." "By who?" Gloria's voice cracked. "You're not with the HOA board, I've never seen either of you before." "Lady," the heavy one smirked, pulling a jug from the SUV. "We are the HOA." The jug was olive green, military style, with a biohazard symbol stamped in black and yellow. Elijah took a step back, but it was too late. The bald man twisted the cap and upended the container. A stream of greenish fluid splashed onto the patio with a loud hiss, and onto Elijah. His left arm. His legs. His chest. The reaction was instant. Elijah screamed, a raw, primal sound that split the air like lightning. Not a yelp. Not a shout. A scream that belonged to war zones and nightmares. He collapsed, writhing, his limbs twitching. His skin began to bubble, the fabric of his shirt fusing to his chest in blistering patches. Gloria shrieked and lunged toward him, fumbling for her phone. David heard the screamed from inside and dropped the coffee mug, ceramic shattering across the tile. He sprinted barefoot through the hallway, out the sliding door, through the mulch and gravel and whatever else tore at his soles. Nothing mattered. Only the scream. "Elijah," he roared. His son lay curled on the concrete, convulsing in agony. Gloria knelt beside him, hands shaking too violently to dial 911. David dropped to his knees, unsure where to touch. His boy's arms were red, blistered, the skin already peeling. "What did you do to him?" he bellowed, his voice shredded by panic. The men stood motionless. One smirked. The other adjusted his grip on the empty jug. "He was warned," the heavier man muttered. "Should have followed the chemical safety code." "He's 11, you psycho!" David shouted. "You burned him, he's a child." "Watch your tone," the bald one snapped. "You don't speak to HOA enforcement like that." Then, as casually as if they just delivered a package, they turned and walked back to the SUV. David scrambled to his feet, rage surging like electricity. He lunged after them but stumbled, crashing onto the pavement. By the time he got up, the SUV was already reversing, tires screaming against the driveway, leaving behind scorch marks, chemical fumes, and Elijah's cries. Paramedics arrived in 7 minutes. 7 agonizing minutes that felt like a lifetime. Elijah's shirt had to be cut off, his skin stuck to the fabric like melted wax. One EMT, an older man with trembling hands, cursed under his breath. "This isn't pool cleaner," he muttered. "This is industrial grade. God help him." David rode in the ambulance, clutching his son's hand as the sirens wailed. At St. Vincent Medical Center, doctors worked quickly, injecting painkillers, cleaning the burns, wrapping him in gauze. They said the burns were deep, second, possibly third degree. The substance had soaked through his clothes, searing layers of skin. Gloria arrived moments later, eyes wide, hands gripping her purse like it might keep her from falling apart. Hours passed. Machines beeped. Nurses whispered. Elijah lay unconscious, a breathing tube nestled in his nose, his tiny frame swamped by wires and bandages. The hospital smelled like antiseptic, rubber, and fear. 4 hours later, a detective from the Willow Pines PD arrived. Detective Lehrman. Middle-aged, thinning hair, tired eyes. He looked like a man who'd seen too much and cared too little. He introduced himself with a sigh and a notepad. "First of all," he said dully, "we're sorry about what happened to your son." David nodded tightly. "Did you find them?" "Black SUV. No plates. Tactical gear. Street cams were offline in your neighborhood this morning for scheduled maintenance. No witnesses with a plate number. No hits yet." David's jaw clenched. "They poured a weapon on my child and drove away. That's not assault, that's attempted murder." "We're treating it seriously," Lehrman said flatly. "But it's complicated. Could be extremist HOA activity. We've seen a few cases like that." "Extremist HOA?" Gloria echoed, incredulous. "They tried to kill my grandson." "They probably meant to scare you," Lehrman said, not meeting their eyes. "Went too far." David stepped toward him, hands trembling with rage. "You think pouring acid on an 11-year-old is scaring someone?" Lehrman raised his palms. "I'm not excusing it. I'm just saying, it's hard to prosecute without IDs, without footage. No clear chain of command. Could be vigilantes. Could be impersonators. And what are you doing to find them?" "We're following up," he said quietly. "We'll be in touch." Then he left. Just like that. As if Elijah's life was a paperwork inconvenience. That night, David sat in the hospital chair, holding his son's swollen hand. Gloria sat near the foot of the bed, silent. No more birdsong. No more warm breezes. Just the slow, sterile hum of a machine keeping rhythm with a boy's pain. Outside, the perfect neighborhood stayed quiet. But inside that room, something else was born, something sharp, unstoppable, and ready to fight. The night after the attack, sleep never came. Not for David. Not for Gloria. And certainly not for Elijah, who moaned softly in his hospital bed, his body trapped in a prison of gauze and pain. Machines beeped steadily, nurses moved in and out with quiet urgency, and the sterile scent of antiseptic clung to every surface like guilt. The hallway lights buzzed overhead. David sat slumped in the plastic chair next to Elijah's bed, staring at his son's face, what little of it wasn't swollen or covered in bandages. Every so often, Elijah stirred, his lips twitching, as if his body was still trying to escape what had happened. But there was no escaping it. Not anymore. They had tried to file a report. Told their story. The detective had scribbled notes, nodded grimly, and left. And then, nothing. No phone calls. No patrol car outside. No follow-up. Just silence. As if Elijah's agony was already being shelved. By morning, the silence had hardened into something else, resolve. David knew, deep down, that the system wasn't going to help them. The people who were supposed to protect them had already looked away. And so he got up, kissed the top of his son's bandaged hand, and walked out of the hospital room with fire in his chest. It was time to find someone who would listen. But before that, there were more immediate battles. Elijah's condition worsened. The chemical burns weren't just surface level. They were deep. Angry. His wounds began to blister and peel. His fever spiked. Doctors explained that the foreign substance had likely been corrosive, industrial grade. Gloria sobbed quietly in the corner while Elijah whimpered in his sleep, occasionally muttering things like, "I didn't mean to," and "I said I was sorry." The guilt crushed David. He should have been there. He should have stopped them. The HOA board finally responded 3 days later. David attended the meeting alone. It was held in a bland conference room inside the Willow Pines clubhouse, where lemonade was normally served during bake sales and summer swim meets. Now, it reeked of burnt coffee and cheap air freshener. The board members sat in a line behind a folding table, papers stacked in neat piles in front of them like armor. At the center sat Cynthia Brome, the president of the HOA, tight bun, tighter jaw, and eyes that flickered with discomfort every time David spoke. He told them everything. Every second. Every scream. He demanded accountability. He demanded action. When he finished, Cynthia cleared her throat. "Mr. Thomas, we're deeply sorry for your family's suffering. But after a thorough internal review, we've determined that the individuals who assaulted your son were not operating under official HOA authority. They were impersonators." David's mouth dropped open. Impersonators? You think that lets you off the hook? Our volunteers are required to carry laminated ID badges and wear official HOA hats during community inspections, Cynthia recited. These men had neither. They had shirts that said HOA enforcement, David shot back. Black tactical gear. You created this culture. You built this idea that you're untouchable and above the law, and now some psychopaths took it further. That's not our responsibility, she said coldly. We've contacted our legal counsel. Legal counsel? David snapped. My son is in a burn unit, and you're lawyering up? This meeting is adjourned, Cynthia said without looking up. The room emptied quickly. David stood alone, trembling with rage. The next day, Elijah underwent his first skin graft. The doctors said more would follow. They couldn't promise how much sensation he'd recover. David stayed by his side through it all, but inside, a storm brewed. The police were making no progress. The HOA had abandoned them. And neighbors, people who used to wave on driveways, exchange cookies on holidays, now avoided eye contact. Some whispered. One anonymous email even suggested that improper pool chemicals might have triggered the incident. As if Elijah had burned himself. That was when David made the call. A name scribbled on the back of an old receipt Gloria had kept tucked in her address book for years. Malcolm Raines, the man on the other end of the phone, answered, his voice deep, scratchy. Used to be Army Intel. Now I find people who don't want to be found. David explained everything. The SUV. The fake HOA enforcers. The chemical attack. The cover-up. There was a long silence, then a low growl of agreement. I've dealt with warlords overseas who had more restraint than some of these local power-hungry wannabes. I'll take the job. Malcolm met David the next morning in a Waffle House parking lot. He looked like he'd stepped out of a different decade, leather jacket, gray beard, mirrored sunglasses. But the laptop in his backpack and the way he asked questions told David he hadn't slowed down a bit. Malcolm worked fast. Faster than David expected. He pulled street cam footage, not from their cul-de-sac, which had been conveniently offline for maintenance, but from a nearby Shell station 2 miles away. It captured a glimpse of the black SUV just before the time of the attack. The image was grainy, but Malcolm enhanced it. Froze the frame. There, he pointed. Tattoo. Side of the neck. That's our guy. He ran the ink pattern through multiple databases, military discharge records, local prison logs, private security licenses. The match came quickly. Dennis Hale. Former private security officer. Let go after 3 excessive force complaints. All cases quietly settled. Never charged. He's a ghost now, Malcolm muttered. No fixed address. No job. But he's not acting alone. From there, the trail led to Redstone County, a rural area 2 hours away, home to wide-open fields, cheap rentals, and a certain training facility that billed itself as an HOA enforcement consulting firm. Malcolm dug deeper. The facility was a front. What it really was, a breeding ground for pseudo-authority. Figures. Disgruntled men. Former guards. Wannabe lawmen. They were being trained by Travis Cole, a name Malcolm recognized immediately. Cole had been quietly dismissed from a contract with Willow Pines HOA 3 years ago after multiple complaints of harassment and intimidation. But instead of disappearing, he'd built something underground, teaching civilians how to look official, sound legal, and dominate neighborhoods through fear. This is bigger than you think, Malcolm said, showing David a folder full of screenshots. Training manuals. Forum posts. Photos of men in tactical gear surrounding homes with clipboards and threats. They've hit other families. Dozens. But none as young as Elijah. David stared at the pages, heart pounding. Why? Because it's about control, Malcolm said simply. These guys think they're restoring order. Punishing people for noncompliance. And your son got caught in it. David stood in the middle of the kitchen that night, the evidence spread out on the table, his fists clenched. Every photo. Every message thread. Every smug, twisted smile. And his son, scarred, shaking, asking if he did something wrong. No. The only ones wrong were the men who thought fake power made them gods. David picked up his phone and looked at Malcolm. We go public. Malcolm nodded once. Let's tell them exactly what happened. All of it. They had no idea what storm they were about to unleash. But it had already begun, quietly, like a rumble before the sky cracks open. And this time, the world was going to hear Elijah's scream. By the time David and Malcolm made the decision to go public, there was no turning back. The system had shrugged. The HOA had hidden behind legal language. The police had stalled behind no leads. But Elijah, still wrapped in gauze, still shivering under hospital lights, had survived. And survival meant his voice still mattered. That night, under the dim kitchen light, David stared at the footage Malcolm had compiled. Blurry images. Chat threads. A still frame of Dennis Hale, caught mid-stride outside the Redstone Academy, that smug grin barely visible under a ball cap. Malcolm leaned across the table, pointing to a highlighted section of text in one of the manuals they had recovered from the training site. Control optics, always act like you have authority. If challenged, escalate fast and hard. David read the line 3 times before closing the folder. We're not taking this to court, Malcolm said, voice low but steady. You won't win. These guys live in the cracks, just enough legality to muddy everything. Then where? The court of public opinion. The next morning, they recorded the video. Malcolm brought over a beat-up camera, nothing fancy. No dramatic lighting. No background music. Just Elijah, pale, fragile, bandaged across his arms and neck, sitting upright in his hospital bed, his hands trembling slightly. David asked him one more time, "You sure you want to do this?" Elijah nodded. Not with bravado, but with quiet determination. He wanted people to see, to hear, to know. The camera rolled, and Elijah began to speak. He described the men, the shirts, the words they used, the smell of the chemical, the pain, how it felt like his skin was being peeled off with fire, how one of them smiled while he screamed, how no one came to help. His voice wavered at times. He had to pause when talking about Gloria's screams or when he mentioned his dad trying to shield him with bare hands. But he didn't cry. He didn't break. When the video ended, David didn't say a word. He just hugged his son and hit upload. They didn't expect it to spread like wildfire. But truth has a way of cutting through noise. By nightfall, the video had been shared 12,000 times. By the next morning, 48,000. Local news stations picked it up. Then national outlets. By the second evening, CNN was knocking on the hospital's front door. People were angry, outraged. Parents who had HOA horror stories came forward. Veterans who had been cited for flying flags. Single mothers fined for chipped paint. Families intimidated into silence by clipboard tyrants. The country watched Elijah's face, scarred but strong, and something clicked. This wasn't a one-time event. This was a system that had festered behind fences and bylaws for years. Within a week, the DOJ launched a formal investigation. Malcolm handed over everything: digital files, location coordinates, license lookups, internal chats from HOA extremist forums. The FBI raided the Redstone County compound. Inside, they found fake badges, tactical gear, printouts of HOA violation forms designed to mimic official documents, and a stockpile of unregulated chemicals labeled enforcement deterrent. Travis Cole was arrested on site, still wearing his self-issued Chief Compliance Officer vest. He didn't resist. Neither did Dennis Hale, who was picked up at a roadside motel in Arizona, trying to bleach his tattoos and shave his head. The charges came down swift and brutal: assault with a chemical weapon, impersonating law enforcement, endangering the welfare of a minor, conspiracy, fraud. No bail. The media hounded the Willow Pines HOA. At first, they tried to deny everything. Cynthia Brome issued a public statement expressing sympathy but reaffirming that the men involved had no formal link to the HOA. But as documents surfaced, emails showing past contracts with Travis Cole, old committee meeting notes referencing tactical enforcement partners, the narrative fell apart. Board members resigned. Half of the HOA's leadership was replaced within 2 weeks. The enforcement committee was dissolved permanently. The community, once polished and quiet, became ground zero for a reckoning. Over 70 families from across the state joined together in a class action lawsuit, citing years of overreach, harassment, and unlawful enforcement. David Thomas became the unofficial spokesperson. But he always reminded the press, it wasn't about him. This is about Elijah, he told them. About every child who thought they were safe in their own backyard. As for Elijah, he healed slowly. The scars remained, vivid across his shoulder and neck, but so did his spirit. He returned home to a living room transformed into a temporary recovery center, hospital bed, for stand, a shelf full of books people had mailed in from all over the country. Letters arrived daily. From other kids. From teachers. From soldiers. From strangers who saw themselves in his pain and his bravery. He read every single one. A year passed. Life began to find a rhythm again. David worked from home full-time. Gloria planted new flowers around the pool, this time bright marigolds and sunflowers instead of the delicate hydrangeas that had withered in the months after the attack. Elijah started walking without a cane. He still winced when it rained. Still had nights where he woke up sweating, gripping the sheets like lifelines. But he didn't shrink. He didn't retreat. The pain had not broken him. It had forged him. On the first anniversary of the attack, the community held a gathering at Willow Pines Central Park. The lawn had been redone, the old rusted benches replaced. But the centerpiece, new, permanent, was what everyone came to see. A bronze statue, standing 6 feet tall, cast in the shape of a young boy. Not an exact likeness, but close enough. The posture unmistakable. One arm raised high, palm open, not in surrender, but in defiance. At his feet lay a crushed metal badge, inscribed with the words, HOA. Enforcement. And on the plaque below it, to those who refuse to be silenced by false power, in honor of Elijah Thomas. Hundreds attended. Some cried. Some brought candles. Others stood in silence. Elijah didn't speak. He didn't have to. When it was time, he walked, slowly but without help, up to the statue. He touched its hand, felt the cool metal beneath his fingers, and closed his eyes. Behind him, cameras clicked. The nation watched. But Elijah wasn't thinking about them. He was thinking about the scream that had changed everything. And the voice that would never be silenced again. What happened to Elijah Thomas wasn't just an attack on one boy, it was a spotlight on a system that had long operated in the shadows. A system that allowed fake power to masquerade as authority and let intimidation dress itself up as compliance. His story reminds us how quickly peace can shatter when we stop paying attention to who we allow to police our communities, and how dangerous silence becomes when good people look the other way. But there's also something deeper in Elijah's journey, the power of standing up when no one else will. His family could have backed down. They could have let the fear consume them, like so many before. But they didn't. They spoke up. They sought truth. And when the law failed, they turned to the people. To the power of the truth. And it worked. The lesson here is clear. Never underestimate how far lies can travel when they're dressed in uniforms. And never forget how far truth can reach when it comes from someone brave enough to speak through the pain. We live in a time where real accountability often feels out of reach, but Elijah's story proves that when communities unite, when voices rise together, change becomes not just possible, it becomes inevitable. So if you're watching this and you've ever been mistreated, intimidated, or silenced by someone hiding behind a badge they had no right to wear, know this, you are not alone. And your voice matters. Keep speaking. Keep fighting. Because someone out there is listening. And justice, even if delayed, can still find its way. On behalf of U.S. Justice Story, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying with us through this powerful journey. Stories like Elijah's are not easy to tell, but they are necessary. Your support, whether it's a comment, a share, or just watching to the end, helps bring these stories into the light where they can no longer be ignored. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing, sharing, and joining our growing community of truth seekers and justice believers. Because at the end of the day, we don't just tell stories. We amplify voices. Thank you again. Stay aware. Stay strong. And above all, stay loud for those who've been silenced.